I gripped the doorframe to steady myself, the cane rattling softly against the bare floor. The room I had dreamed of coming back to, my quilt, my cedar chest, the photos of a life lived, was gone. Only a wire hanger swung in the empty closet, mocking me with its silence. We had to make space, my son had said. Space. After 22 months in rehab, after learning to walk again, after building this house piece by piece, I was reduced to nothing. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The cab driver didn't offer to help with her bag. He watched her fumble it out of the trunk, one hand still stiff from the fall that shattered her hip 22 months ago. The sky over Portland was a dull sheet of gray, mist pressing down like a held breath. Joan Miller stood for a moment at the curb, staring at the house that should have welcomed her. The porch steps creaked beneath her as she climbed slowly. The paint was chipped, the planter boxes dead. She knocked once out of habit, then turned the handle. The door wasn't locked. Inside, it was too quiet. The smell hit her first. Not rot, not filth, but emptiness. That subtle, unsettling scent of air that hasn't wrapped itself around life in a long time. She stepped inside, boots clicking against bare wood. The living room was stripped to its bones. No couch, no pictures, no books, just dust outlines where things used to be. Even the curtains were gone. She gripped the wall, heart climbing into her throat. "Hello," she called, her voice raspier than she remembered. Brian from the kitchen footsteps. Then Dana appeared, holding a mug like she lived here. Her blonde hair was too bright, too polished for the house's state. "Oh, Joan, you're back early," she said flatly, as if Joan had returned from the grocery store. Not from nearly 2 years in a rehab clinic. Joan blinked. "Where is everything?" Dana shrugged, sipped her coffee. "We had to make space. You know how small this place feels with so much clutter." Joan moved down the hall, cane tapping softly. She stopped outside her room. Then she opened the door. It was hollow. Her bed was gone. Her vanity, the quilt her mother had stitched, the cedar chest, the framed photos, all of it vanished. Only a wire hanger remained, swinging slightly in the closet like it had something to say. Her breath caught. Brian appeared behind her, arms crossed. "Look, Mom, you were gone a long time. We thought, we didn't think you'd need all that stuff. Dana's been managing the bills. It got tight." She turned slowly. "You sold my things." He lifted his chin. "We needed the money." A silence fell so thick you could hear the refrigerator hum from across the house. Then, a softer voice. "Grandma." Emma stood at the end of the hall, hoodie zipped up to her neck, earbuds dangling from her pocket. Her eyes flicked between her, parents and Joan. "I didn't know they'd sell everything," Emma said barely above a whisper. I didn't know until it was already gone." Joan's lips parted, but the words wouldn't come. Her hands trembled at her sides. This wasn't neglect. It was erasure. She turned, walked out of the room. "Joan," Brian said, following. "Don't be dramatic. You can stay in the guest room for now. We had to do what we had to do." She kept walking, step by step, out onto the porch again, cold wind brushing her face. The clouds had thickened, rain threatened, sharp and sour on the breeze. A red sedan pulled up to the curb. Gloria Sanchez slammed the door before the engine even stopped. "You gotta be kidding me," she said, eyes scanning Joan's face, then the hollow windows behind her. Joan didn't speak. She didn't have to. Gloria stormed up the steps, boots stomping like judgment itself. "Let me guess. They pondered your life while you were learning to walk again." Joan nodded once. That was all she could manage. Gloria's face hardened. "They forgot who owns this roof." Behind them, Dana pulled the front door closed, but not before muttering, "Some people don't know when they're not welcome." Joan's eyes glinted just for a second before she turned away. The rain started slow and deliberate. Joan stepped out from the porch cover, letting it soak into her gray curls, her shoulders. She didn't flinch. Gloria pulled out her phone. "You're staying with me tonight. Tomorrow we begin digging." Joan looked at her, then back at the house that no longer felt like hers. "Let them think they've won," she said, voice steady now. Then she added, almost to herself, "They're going to wish I hadn't come home." The next morning, Portland's rain had thickened into a steady percussion against Gloria's kitchen windows. Joan sat at the small round table, wrapped in one of Gloria's oversized cardigans. The sleeve swallowed her hands as she stared at the battered metal lockbox sitting in front of her like a relic. The key had been on her necklace all along, pressed against her skin during every physical therapy session, every silent night in the rehab center. She hadn't thought about it in months, not until she realized how much they'd taken. With a small twist, the lock clicked open. Inside, everything was still there, neatly labeled folders, bank statements, deeds, the title to the house, her original will. Joan flipped through them with methodical precision, her fingers steady now, her breath even-dot. Gloria leaned on the counter, arms crossed, coffee steaming in her chipped mug. "Tell me they didn't touch that. They didn't even remember it existed." Joan didn't look up. They were too busy ransacking what they could see. Joan pulled out the most recent property tax notice and flattened it on the table. Her name, her address, paid in full. Then the house deed, still signed only by her and her late husband. Brian's name was nowhere. Her savings account information. Not much left, but not empty. She leaned back slightly, pressing her fingertips. Together, staring down like the paper held a different kind of gravity. Gloria whistled low. "Well, I'll be damned. They sold your chairs, but you own the floor they stood on." Joan's eyes flicked toward her, dry and calm. "They thought I was too far gone to notice that I'd be grateful for a couch to sleep on." "You're not sleeping on a damn couch," Gloria snapped. "Not in my house, and certainly not in theirs." A quiet knock at the side door interrupted them. Emma stepped in, wet hoodie dripping, eyes uncertain. Gloria didn't hide her weariness. "You lost, kid." Emma pulled something from her pocket, flat, small, wrapped in a sandwich bag. "I found this. It was hidden in the back of Dad's desk drawer. I didn't tell them I took it." She set it on the table. A flash drive, bright red, cheap plastic. Joan stared at it for a moment before picking it up. "What's on it?" Gloria asked. Emma swallowed. Screenshots, listings, emails, stuff they posted when they started selling everything. Craigslist, eBay, texts between Mom and some guy who runs a pawn shop in Beaverton. She joked about how old people, stuff sells better when they're still alive. Joan's fingers closed around the flash drive. Emma's voice cracked. "I didn't know how to stop them, but I started saving everything just in case." Joan met her eyes, those same gray-blue ones she'd rocked to sleep 2 decades ago. "You did more than I could have asked for." Gloria raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Joan turned back to the lock, took out a small leather address book, and flipped through it with practiced ease until she landed on a number. She picked up Gloria's landline. It rang twice. A crisp male voice answered, "Colleen Raymond, Estate Law." Joan sat straighter. "Henry Cole. Please tell him it's Joan Miller. He'll remember." There was a pause. Then "Please hold." Gloria mouthed, "Henry Cole." Joan nodded. A click. Then Joan. His voice was older, more worn than she remembered, but still precise. "You're back." "I'm back," she said. "And I need help." A longer pause. "How bad?" They sold. Everything that wasn't nailed down. And I think that's just the start. Henry exhaled through the phone. "You still have the house. I never lost it. Then we have leverage." Joan's fingers tightened on the flash drive. I have receipts, digital and real, and a witness. Emma looked down. Then let's get to work. Henry said, I'll start with a preliminary theft and fraud claim. Good. Joan's voice was quiet but cold. They think this is over. She hung up without waiting for a goodbye. Gloria stared at her for a beat. What now? Joan stood slowly, pressing one palm to the edge of the table for balance. Now we go back to the house. Gloria's brows lifted. You just said it isn't safe. Joan walked to the door, raincoat already draped over one arm. She looked back at Emma. Get your phone ready. I want photos of every corner. Emma nodded. Joan opened the door. The rain had stopped, but the clouds were still hanging low. As they stepped outside, Joan spoke without turning around. If they stole pieces of my life, I'm going to make damn sure every piece becomes evidence. The three of them sat huddled around Gloria's laptop at the kitchen table. The glow from the screen washed Joan's face in pale blue light, sharpening the angles of her cheekbones. Her fingers hovered over the trackpad like she wasn't sure whether to scroll or slam it shut. Emma sat beside her, shoulders hunched, biting at the edge of her thumbnail. She'd spent the morning transferring everything from the flash drive, carefully. Organized folders labeled furniture sales, emails, Craigslist, and pawnshop slips. Joan clicked open the first folder. Up popped a grainy photo of her grandfather clock. Mahogany frame, gold pendulum still showing the wrong time. Posted on Craigslist. For $150 under the title, Lady's Clock Still Works. She scrolled again. Her favorite armchair, the cherry-stained china cabinet, her wedding ring, no box, just a blurry photo on someone's palm posted 3 weeks after her third surgery. Each file clicked open like a wound. Joan didn't cry. Her jaw set tighter with each image. But the shaking in her hand, so subtle it barely moved the cursor, didn't stop. They didn't just sell my things, she said finally. They mocked them. Mocked me. Gloria leaned over, pointing at the screen. That's Dana's email. Look, estate liquidation without the funeral. LOL. Real sweet, huh? Joan scrolled again. A full PDF of pawn slips, some signed, some not. One of them listed the bracelet Brian had once given her on her birthday with a fake seller name and a cash payout of $60. Emma cleared her throat. There's more in the Dropbox link. I emailed Henry. All the stuff they didn't delete in time. Joan reached over and took her hand. Emma flinched a little, then gripped back. Gloria stood up abruptly, grabbed a pen and her notebook from the drawer. Paper beats excuses, she muttered, writing as fast as she could. Times, dates, amounts. We'll stack these bastards high in evidence. Joan closed the laptop slowly. I want to update my will. Emma blinked. Wait, now. I should have done it before the rehab center, but I still believed. She stopped herself, then straightened. I believed Brian would do the right thing. Gloria's face hardened. That's the kind of belief that gets you robbed. Joan nodded once. No more. She rose, walked to the lockbox still sitting beside Gloria's coffee maker, and opened it again. She pulled out her will, 4 pages, notarized, signed, with her old looping signature. She stared at Brian's name for a long time. Then she took out a pen and drew a single line through it. I'll have Henry draft a full revision, she said. But this one's symbolic. Emma's voice cracked. Grandma. Joan turned toward her. I swear, Emma said, swallowing hard. I didn't know it would get that bad. I knew they were selling things, but I thought it was just old stuff. Boxes in the garage, and by the time I saw what they were doing, I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't know if you'd ever come back. Joan stepped closer. You didn't turn away. That's more than I can say for either of them. Emma nodded, her eyes brimming. Outside, the rain had returned, softer now, a mist settling over the neighborhood like a quiet reckoning. Joan returned to the table just as Gloria's phone buzzed. She answered, "Yeah." A pause. She handed the phone to Joan. "It's Henry." Joan took it. "Yes, I've filed the preliminary claim," Henry said. "Fraud, unauthorized liquidation of assets, and suspected elder exploitation. I'll have more by tomorrow." Joan closed her eyes for a moment. "Good. You sure you're ready for this?" he asked. "I was never supposed to come back, but I did, and I'm not leaving again." She hung up. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Gloria broke the silence. "I know it's early, but I say we open a bottle of wine." Joan shook her head. "Not yet." She looked back at the laptop, at the digital ledger of every stolen object. "I want to see the pawn shop next." Emma looked up now. Joan's voice was steady. "If my past is sitting behind someone's glass counter, I want to look it in the eye." By late afternoon, the fog had rolled back in over Portland like a second skin. Inside Gloria's house, the lights were low and the mood lower. Joan sat at the dining table with her reading glasses perched low on her nose, flipping through a printout. From Henry Cole's office. The heading was clear, credit report. Joan Elizabeth Miller beneath it. Lines of red ink. 3 credit cards she never opened. 2 cash loans. 1 personal line of credit with a signature she didn't recognize. But the name was hers. Emma sat across from her cataloging photos on her laptop. She kept glancing up, watching Joan's face. Tighten by notch. "They used my name," Joan said quietly, tapping a finger against one of the statements. "That's my social right there. Look at the birth date. They didn't even bother to hide it." Gloria hovered nearby, arms folded. "How far behind are they?" "Some payments are months past due," Joan said. "One of these accounts has a default flag. That's collections." Emma turned pale. "But how? Doesn't the bank require verification?" Joan looked up. Her eyes weren't wide with shock anymore. They were narrowed. "Not when the paperwork looks legit. Not when your son has your mail, your ID, your trust." Gloria swore under her breath. "I knew Dana was greedy, but this is rot." Joan's voice was steady. This wasn't just greed. It was planning. She tapped the signature line on one of the loans. "He tried to mimic my handwriting, almost pulled it off." There was a soft knock at the front door. Gloria moved to open it and found a courier standing under a dripping umbrella, envelope in hand. "For Ms. Joan Miller," he said, before turning back to the rain. Inside the envelope, a thick folder stamped with the emblem of Cole and Raymond. Joan opened it, scanning quickly. "Henry pulled records," she said. "Confirmed they used my identity for at least 4 accounts. He's requesting full audits, financial fraud, elder exploitation, false impersonation. The claims are stacking." Gloria grinned without humor. "They buried you in paper. Now we'll bury them in it." Joan set the envelope down gently. "They buried me once. I'll bury them legally." Emma looked up. "What do you want me to do next?" Joan nodded toward the notepad beside her. "Keep cataloging heirlooms, missing furniture, jewelry, anything you remember seeing around the house that isn't there now." Emma hesitated. "Even the old stuff?" "Especially the old stuff." She opened a new spreadsheet and began typing quietly, lips pressed into a determined line. Gloria brought over 2 cups of tea and set one beside Joan. Slow revenge tastes best. Joan picked it up, fingers wrapping around the warmth. "I don't need fast. I need permanent." They sat in silence for a few minutes, only the clicking of Emma's keys, the soft whistle of wind outside, the subtle squeak of Gloria's rocking chair as she drifted back and forth. Then Emma froze. Joan noticed first. "What is it?" Emma turned, the laptop around. On the screen was a listing from an online estate liquidation site. The photo showed a silver-framed mirror that used to hang in Joan's foyer. It was cracked down the side, but unmistakable. The seller listed it under the name Reclaim and Renew LLC, a business neither of them had heard of. Joan's eyes narrowed. "That's a front." Gloria leaned in. What kind of front? Joan stood faster than she should have. They're laundering the sales through a business name. They didn't just sell my things, they created a shell to make it look legitimate. Emma's eyes widened. Do you think there's more? Joan stared at the screen, the mirror's broken reflection staring back. I think we've only seen the tip. The courtroom smelled faintly of lemon polish and anxiety. Joan sat upright at the petitioner's table, spine straight despite the ache crawling up her hip. Her gray cardigan matched the color of the sky outside, but her eyes were sharp, unflinching. Henry Cole sat beside her, calm and composed, a man who'd spent decades knowing when to pounce. Across the aisle, Brian adjusted his suit collar, visibly sweating. Dana clutched her purse with white knuckles, whispering something into his ear. Emma sat behind Joan, phone in hand, earbuds unplugged and ready. Judge Franklin entered, robe flowing behind him like a warning. 70, no nonsense, and known for one thing, an intolerance for anyone who exploited the elderly. He glanced down at the stack of motions and exhibits before him. This is a competency hearing, not a circus. Keep it tight. Brian stood first. His voice was smooth, rehearsed. Your Honor, my mother was in rehab for nearly 2 years. She suffered falls, memory issues. I don't believe she can safely live alone, let alone manage financial matters. This petition is about protecting her. Joan's jaw flexed. Dana rose, her tone more dramatic. She couldn't even walk when she came back. The house was falling apart. We stepped in. We cleaned up. She's fragile. Judge Franklin tilted his head. And who asked you to? Dana blinked. I mean, we didn't want her to come home to chaos. Henry stood. Your Honor, Ms. Miller may be recovering, but she is far from incompetent. In fact, she has something to say on that. Joan stood slowly, hands steady on the edge of the table. I fell once, broke a hip. Rehab was hard, but I walked out on my own. I can tell you the name of every nurse I worked with, every exercise I had to master. I balanced a checkbook before Brian ever held one. Judge Franklin nodded. Continue? Joan's voice cut clear through the courtroom. When I returned, my belongings were gone, my accounts tampered with, my name misused. I may be older, but I'm not confused. A quiet murmur passed through the gallery. Henry turned to the clerk and nodded. The screen beside the judge flickered to life. Exhibit 4, Henry said. Receipts, listings, and communications showing Brian and Dana liquidated Ms. Miller's possessions without consent. Images flicked by, Craigslist ads, pawn slips, that same photo of the wedding ring in someone's palm. Dana shifted, eyes darting. Henry gestured again. And here, audio recordings. Emma. Emma Rose plugged her phone into the speaker system. Brian's voice filled the courtroom. She's not going to need the silver. Rehab's just a stop before the grave. Then Dana, let's get cash. While it's still her name on the title, Dana's face drained. Brian stared at the table. Judge Franklin's voice dropped to a dangerous calm. So, you were protecting her by selling her things and pocketing the profits? Brian stumbled. We thought... Joan didn't look at him. Henry opened another folder. And finally, Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence this home equity loan signed supposedly by Joan Miller while she was residing full-time in a medical facility. He handed the document to the judge. Judge Franklin examined it. This was signed while she was on oxygen and wheelchair-bound. Henry nodded. We've submitted a timeline from the rehab facility. She was under care and unable to travel the day. This was notarized. Joan's voice came out steady. That's not my signature. Judge Franklin's gaze hardened. Forgery on a federally regulated loan. Dana's lip trembled. Brian said we needed silence. The gavel slammed once. I'm placing an immediate hold on all disputed assets and accounts pending criminal investigation. Mr. Cole, you'll coordinate with the DA's office. Ms. Bakeway, Miller. This court finds you competent. Extremely so. Joan didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She just turned slightly and looked at Brian. He couldn't meet her eyes. Judge Franklin stood. Recess for 1 hour. Court will reconvene on financial disclosure. As the room stirred with whispers, Henry leaned toward Joan. We've just flipped the table. Emma walked up behind her, voice quiet. What now? Joan turned slowly, the edges of her mouth curled, not into a smile, but into resolve. Now I make them pay for every signature they faked. An hour later, the courtroom lights buzzed faintly as everyone returned to their seats. The energy had shifted, no longer tense, but volatile. Joan re-entered quietly, her cane tapping once with every third step, her face calm but unreadable. Henry stood, papers neatly arranged. He leaned toward her. They'll start with the forensic report. You won't have to speak today. Joan gave a small nod. I've already said enough. Across the aisle, Brian sat rigid, his knuckles white against the table. Dana fidgeted beside him, eyes darting toward the exit every few seconds, like she might still have time to disappear. Judge Franklin returned with a folder in hand, marked with a blue Forensic Services seal. He didn't sit. He remained standing, looming like a thundercloud, ready to burst. This court has reviewed a sworn statement from a licensed handwriting expert. He said the conclusion is definitive. The signature on the home equity loan application is not Joan Miller's. Silence. It is, Judge Franklin continued, a deliberate forgery, one executed with clear intent to deceive a federally regulated institution for personal gain. Brian's face paled to gray. Dana let out a breathy gasp. Joan didn't move. Her expression remained carved in stone. Mr. Miller, the judge said, tone ice cold. Do you understand that forging a financial document, particularly one related to a reverse mortgage, is a federal felony, punishable by prison time? Brian's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He blinked twice, then finally muttered, I didn't. No, the signature wouldn't hold up. Henry's mouth twitched. That's not a denial. Dana shot to her feet. It wasn't just him. We both thought we could manage things better than Joan could. Judge Franklin raised a hand. You are not a party in this. Hearing, Mrs. Miller, sit down. Dana sat hard. Henry stepped forward. In light of the confirmed forgery and existing evidence of financial exploitation, we're requesting an immediate and full asset freeze, joint and separate accounts under Brian and Dana Miller, including the LLC discovered during our investigation. The judge didn't hesitate. Granted, all accounts are to be frozen as of 3 p.m. today. All proceeds from the home equity loan are to be held in escrow until the criminal portion of this case is resolved. Gloria, watching from the gallery, let out a slow, quiet whistle. Joan didn't react. Not when Brian dropped his head. Not when Dana whispered something that sounded like, "What did you do?" Not even when their attorney whispered urgently in a panicked voice too soft to carry. She just sat still, her cane leaning against the table, her hands folded in her lap like she was in church. Emma leaned in and gently squeezed her grandmother's hand. Joan blinked, then turned slightly, just enough for Emma to see the shimmer in her eyes, but they didn't fall. She wouldn't give anyone the pleasure of seeing that. Judge Franklin finally sat. This case is no longer a civil matter. I am forwarding it to the District Attorney's Office for felony review. Miss Miller, Mr. Cole, please coordinate with the state prosecutor. Henry stood nodding. We'll make arrangements. Brian rubbed his face. This wasn't supposed to happen like this. Joan's voice broke the quiet like a blade sliding from its sheath. What exactly did you expect, Brian? A thank you card? He didn't answer. The gavel dropped once. Court is adjourned. The sound echoed like a door slamming shut on everything they'd taken for granted. Joan rose slowly, but with purpose. She didn't look back as she walked out. Emma by her side, Gloria close behind. Outside, the rain had returned in earnest, a Cold, sharp wind cut across the courthouse steps. Henry caught up to them beneath the overhang. "That was just the first blow," he said. "But it landed harder than they ever saw coming." Joan looked up at the stormy sky. "No," she said softly. "That was just the prelude." She turned to Emma. "Ready for the next move?" Emma nodded. "Whatever it is." Joan opened the car door and slid in slowly, careful, deliberate. "We're going to cut off their air next." At precisely 3:07 p.m., Brian's phone lit up with a push notification he didn't understand. Transaction declined. Wells Fargo Business Checking Reclaim and Renew LLC. Account frozen. He stared at it from the parking lot of a strip mall, jaw slack, while Donna was already halfway through the grocery store with a cart full of overpriced organic nonsense. Inside, she strolled up to the checkout with her usual self-importance, phone in hand, snapping at the cashier before the girl even spoke. "Separate the eggs. I don't want them on top of the produce." "Yes, ma'am." Dana slid her card across the terminal. Beep. Declined. She frowned and tried again, this time more forcefully, as if pressing harder might force it through. Beep. Declined. The line behind her was growing. A child cried somewhere near the cereal aisle. Dana tried a second card, then a third. Nothing. "Try it again," she snapped at the cashier. The girl just looked at her helplessly. "I already did." People were staring now. Behind a row of boxed goods, Emma stood with her phone raised. The lens zoomed in just enough to catch Dana's expression, without revealing herself. The slow unraveling, the disbelief curdling into rage. Click. Video rolling. Dana slammed her hands on the counter. "This is ridiculous. There's plenty of money in those accounts." "No, there isn't," said a voice behind. Her. Dana spun. Joan stood by the automatic doors, calm as glass, a single canvas bag on her arm. Gloria was beside her, holding a bouquet of lilies. Joan didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. "The accounts were frozen today. Court order. You might want to start using coupons." Dana's lips trembled. "You don't get to gloat." Joan tilted. Her head. "This isn't gloating. This is what comes after the truth." She turned without waiting for a response, her heels clicking against the tile. Gloria followed, but not before giving Dana a pointed once-over. "Get used to it," Gloria muttered. "You're going to be seeing a lot more decline signs in your future." Outside, the wind had picked up again. Leaves tumbled across the asphalt like they were trying to flee the scene. Joan and Gloria loaded the single bag into the car. Just basics. Chamomile tea, one lavender candle, a new framed photo of Joan's wedding day from the Walgreens photo counter. By the time they got back to the house, Joan moved differently. Still slow, but straighter, more grounded. She stepped into her bedroom, still stripped from the day she came home, still haunted by empty corners. But today, she had a plan. She lit the candle and placed it on the windowsill. She hung the wedding photo on the wall where the mirror used to be. She pulled her mother's quilt from Gloria's guest closet, still smelling faintly of cedar. Small, comforts, but hers. Gloria stood in the doorway. "You know it's a hell of a thing seeing Dana twitch like a bug on a hot skillet." Joan chuckled softly, easing into the armchair they'd rescued from a storage unit. "This is only Act 1. Gloria nodded. "We just turned the lights on. Next, we show the audience what they've really been doing backstage." In the living room, Emma sat cross-legged on the floor, uploading the footage of Dana's meltdown to a private folder for Henry. The phone buzzed. Henry's voice came through the speaker. "We've got traction. The LLC was registered under Brian's name, but the banking trail leads to Dana. I've handed the files to the fraud unit." Joan stepped out from her room. "How fast can they move?" "Fast enough. The state's interested and they're pissed." Joan didn't smile. She just nodded once. "Let me know when they're ready to talk restitution," she said. "I want that on the record." She hung up, then turned to Emma. What's next on our list? Emma flipped open the notebook. Story units and the car title. I think there's something off with the VIN number on your old Camry. Joan paused, taking that in. If they stole even my car, then we take the wheels right out from under them. The knock on the door was sharp. Impatient, Joan stepped back from the window and looked toward Gloria, who stood in the kitchen drying dishes. Emma was already halfway to the front door. Don't open it unless… Joan started, but it was too late. Emma yanked the door open. Brian stood on the porch, soaked from the rain, eyes wild. His suit jacket was wrinkled, the tie hanging like a noose. His phone was clutched in one hand, shaking slightly. What the hell did you do? He spat, stepping into the foyer without invitation. Gloria moved fast, blocking his path. You don't get to barge in here, Brian. But Emma was already stepping forward, voice low but firm. You lied. You forged everything. You used Grandma's name like it was a bank account. Brian's jaw flexed. You don't know what you're talking about. I know you opened credit lines in her name. I know you created a shell business and sold her things. I know you forged a federal loan while she was in a hospital bed. Emma's voice cracked, but she didn't stop. You're a coward. He lunged toward her, not with a fist, but with a shove that sent her stumbling back against the wall. Joan stepped in. Like a flash of lightning through a storm, she moved in front of Emma, standing between them with both hands raised. Not pleading, not scared, commanding. Enough. Brian froze. Joan's voice, when it came, was louder than it had been in months. Loud enough to silence the room. Loud enough to echo. You don't touch her. You don't raise your voice in this house. And you don't pretend you're the victim. Brian's mouth moved, but no words came out. Emma was shaking now. Whether from shock or rage, it was hard to tell. I gave you everything, Joan said, eyes locked on him. And when I was at my lowest, you stripped it all away, piece by piece. Like I wouldn't notice, like I wouldn't come back. I didn't mean… Brian stammered. Gloria moved beside Emma and placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. Joan didn't blink. You meant to profit off my absence. You meant to erase me. The front door burst open again. This time, Henry Cole, coat soaked from the same storm Brian had walked through, briefcase in hand. He paused at the scene. Joan standing. Tall, Brian rigid and pale, Emma visibly trembling. Are we escalating now? Henry asked, voice icy. Brian turned. She just… Save it, Henry snapped. I just filed for an emergency restraining order. Based on that outburst and the pattern of intimidation, we've got grounds for elder abuse and domestic aggression. You just sealed it with your entrance. Brian's eyes darted from Henry to Joan, then to Emma, who pulled her phone from her pocket and held it up. She'd been recording the entire confrontation. Dana appeared at the edge of the porch, mascara smeared, hair in disarray. Brian, she hissed, you said this wouldn't get worse. Joan turned to her, voice low and cutting. Still think this is just about money, Dana? Dana looked between them. Her husband, her stepdaughter, the lawyer, the woman she once underestimated. She cracked. This wasn't my idea, she shrieked. I told him to stop. He said you weren't coming back. Brian spun toward her. You said we needed the money. You said no, Dana screamed. You said she was as good as dead. The room fell into a dense, stunned silence. Joan stepped back, her hand still hovering protectively in front of Emma. Henry opened his briefcase, pulling out papers, plastic sleeves, and a crisp, official-looking document. The judge already signed the order, he said. Brian, you're not allowed within 500 FT of Joan or Emma, starting now. Brian looked like he might collapse. Joan walked to the door and opened it wide. Get out of my house, she said. Brian didn't move. I said get out. This time the voice cracked thunder. He left. Dana followed, quiet now, her unraveling complete. Joan closed the door slowly, locked it, then leaned her head against the frame. Gloria helped Emma to the couch. Henry stood silent, respectful. Joan turned, calmer now. "This changes things," Henry said. Joan nodded. "Now we're not just chasing." "Restitution." She looked at Emma, voice firm. "We're going after everything." Joan sat silently in the back corner of the courtroom, dressed in charcoal gray and pearls, the kind of quiet dignity that didn't need to announce itself. Next to her, Henry flipped through a stack of documents, the edges tabbed and color-coded. Precision. Across the aisle, Brian looked hollowed out, slouched in a wrinkled blazer, eyes glassy. Dana was beside him, dabbing her temples with a folded tissue, makeup smeared and hair unwashed. The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs. Word of the restraining order had gotten around. Reporters lined the back wall. This hearing wasn't just legal, it was a spectacle. Judge Franklin entered, face like thunderclouds. "Let's move quickly, Mr. Cole." Henry stood. "Your Honor, we've traced a previously undisclosed bank account under the LLC Reclaim and Renew, linked directly to loan funds obtained fraudulently under Ms. Miller's name. The balance as of this morning was $162,141. A wave rippled through the gallery. Joan's expression didn't change. She simply adjusted her cuff. The judge turned his glare toward Brian. "You didn't report this account in your financial disclosures." Brian cleared his throat. I didn't remember." "You didn't remember 6 figures?" Dana leaned over, whispering furiously in his ear. He shrugged her off. Henry stepped forward. "We've submitted verified statements from the bank along with timestamps showing the transfers occurred days after the forged equity loan was approved. In short, the money didn't disappear. It was hidden." Judge Franklin slammed the gavel once. "That account is to be seized immediately. The funds will be frozen and placed in escrow pending final restitution orders." Dana gasped audibly, then again louder. "No, no, no," she whispered, rocking slightly. "That was supposed to be ours." Henry didn't blink. "That money was never yours." Dana stood. "This isn't fair. We needed it. We have bills. We have plans." She stumbled back a step, then another, like the courtroom had tilted sideways beneath her. Then she collapsed, flat on the floor in a heap of sobbing limbs and smeared mascara, gasping between each cry. Joan didn't move. Paramedics were called. A bailiff helped Brian pull her upright. The judge waited, impassive. When it quieted again, he turned back to Henry. "Anything further?" "One item," Henry said smoothly. "The foreclosure on Mr. and Mrs. Miller's home due to unpaid mortgage and tax penalties was finalized this week." Brian flinched. Dana whimpered beside him, still crumpled, against his side. Henry tapped a folder on the table. "The property was quietly purchased at auction by a private trust we represent." Joan didn't look at Brian. She looked straight at the judge. The courtroom held its breath. Judge Franklin nodded slowly. "Let the record reflect the purchase and the irony." Joan rose with measured grace. Her voice was calm, but it cut like a violin string. "They sold my legacy, my home, my memories." She turned to face Brian for the first time. "Now I own theirs." A gasp, then a hush. Brian slumped back into his chair like the bones had been taken out of him. Dana just stared at the floor, unmoving. Emma watched it all with wide, unblinking eyes. Outside, the sky had begun to clear, for the first time in days. Sunlight stretched across the courthouse steps in narrow golden lines. As they exited, Emma slipped her hand into Joan's. "You've already won," she said softly. Joan shook her head. "No, winning is what you do when you're playing fair." Gloria met them at the bottom of the steps, sunglasses on, arms crossed. "Now crush them." Henry fell into step beside them. "Public opinion's on your side. Dana's meltdown is already circulating online, and the DA's office wants to schedule a deeper financial review." Joan smiled faintly. Let them dig. They'll find bones. Emma stopped walking. So what happens now? Joan turned to her, voice low but purposeful. Now we burn the name they used to cash out my life and build something better where it stood. The eviction notice was taped to the front door in plain view. Legal-sized, bold print, bright orange sticker across the top like a warning flare. Brian saw it before Dana did. He froze mid-step on the porch, coffee cup in one hand, mail in the other. The wind blew the loose edges of the notice, but the word was unmistakable. Vacate 72 hours. Dana stepped out behind him, still wearing pajama pants and last night's eyeliner. What's that? He didn't answer. She yanked the notice off the door and read it, then read it again and again. No, she breathed. No, this has to be a mistake. Inside the mailbox, a manila envelope waited. A copy of the court-approved sale confirmation. Title transferred. Property purchased at auction for a fraction of its value. Buyer, Miller Resilience Trust. Trustee, Joan E. Miller. Dana dropped the envelope like it was acid. Brian stumbled back inside. He yanked open kitchen drawers, grabbed his phone, and started dialing someone. Anyone. But no one picked up. No. Bank, no lawyer, no help. Across the street, neighbors began to gather. A man walking his dog paused, adjusting his sunglasses. A young couple on the corner whispered, one of them pointing. The air buzzed, not with sympathy, but satisfaction. On the curb sat their unsold dresser, a broken lawn chair, and a cardboard box labeled Fragile in red Sharpie. The irony hung, heavier than the clouds. Joan watched it all from Gloria's passenger seat, parked a safe distance away. She didn't need to be closer. The view was perfect from here. She rolled down the window just enough to let the breeze in. Gloria handed her a paper cup of coffee. You sure you don't want to wave? Joan sipped once, eyes never leaving the scene. No need. They watched as Dana stormed back inside. Brian slammed the door behind her, shouts muffled behind glass. Public humiliation, Gloria said, nodding toward the growing audience. Never goes out of style. Joan didn't answer. She reached into her bag, pulled out a worn photograph of her old living room, fireplace lit, her wedding portrait above the mantel, Emma in footy pajamas curled up on the rug. She folded it gently and placed it on the dashboard. Later that evening, movers arrived. They came not to remove Joan's belongings, but to carry Emma's in. Emma stepped out of the passenger seat of a small U-Haul, sunglasses hiding her eyes, a quiet pride lifting her posture. She didn't look toward Brian and Dana's house, what used to be hers. She looked only at Joan. Joan met her at the front steps. I figured you'd want your own key, Joan said, holding one out on a simple silver ring. Emma took it, swallowed hard. I'll take care of it. I know, Joan said. This was always meant to be yours. Just had to be taken back the right way. They stepped inside together. The walls still bore scars from where photos once hung, but now the space was filled with light. Real light. The living room smelled faintly of lemon oil and lavender. The floors gleamed. Her mother's quilt lay folded across the foot of Emma's new bed upstairs. Back on the porch, Gloria leaned against the railing. Well, she said, now you own the silence. Joan stepped out beside her. No, she replied softly. Emma does. Gloria raised a brow. Joan just smiled, the smallest smile yet. That night, for the first time since returning from rehab, Joan didn't sleep at Gloria's. She sat alone in the old rocking chair on her front porch, the one Dana hadn't gotten around to pawning, a warm cup of tea in her hands, candlelight flickering behind her through the living room window. She looked out at the neighborhood, at the house she now owned. Across the street, its windows dark, its pride stripped. Justice felt colder than she thought it would, but necessary. She reached for her notebook, flipped to a fresh page, and began writing names, not of people, but of causes, foundations, ideas, legacy. The kitchen table was cleared of everything but a yellow legal pad, a stack of typed papers, and a heavy black fountain pen that belonged to Joan's late husband. It hadn't written a word since his funeral until today. Joan sat tall in her chair, glasses perched on her nose as Henry Cole read through the final version of the document in his usual calm, methodical cadence. His voice echoed faintly against the old hardwood and bare walls. I, Joan Elizabeth Miller, being of sound mind and body, he began. Emma sat across from her, still quiet. Gloria stood near the sink, arms crossed, a folded dish towel in her hand she hadn't realized she was. Ringing. Joan's pen moved slowly but confidently, line by line, cutting out Brian Miller, cutting out Dana Miller, adding a clause for the seizure of any disputed assets posthumously tied to fraud, and then naming her granddaughter Emma Grace Miller as the sole heir and executor of the estate. Joan paused, pen hovering. Include the trust, the house, and what's left of the settlement. It all goes to her. Henry nodded, already penciling a note. And this, Joan continued, pulling out a small envelope from her purse. She slid it across the table. A donation clause, 40% to a new fund. Scholarships for elder rehabilitation and long-term recovery, especially for women. Henry unfolded the paper inside and read silently. His eyes softened for just a beat. You want it named after your husband? He asked. Joan shook her head. No, after the women I met in rehab, the ones who didn't get to come back. Gloria swallowed hard behind her. Joan pressed the pen back to paper, a final signature. I've reviewed, witnessed, and confirmed, Henry said, sliding the documents into a manila folder. We'll file a public copy with the court tomorrow. You'll get the sealed originals within a week. Joan leaned back in her chair, exhaling quietly. Not relief, not triumph, just stillness, like something had settled, like something had been put back in its place. Gloria finally spoke. You good? Joan nodded. I feel like I just sealed a vault and I'm the only one holding the key. She looked at Emma. You know what this means, don't you? Emma nodded. I'm not just getting the house, I'm inheriting the fight. Joan smiled faintly. No, you're inheriting the finish line. I've already fought enough for both of us. Gloria wiped at the corner of her eye with the edge of the dish towel. Damn it, she muttered. You're not allowed to make me cry until at least Christmas. Joan stood slowly, smoothing her cardigan. Then you've got 4 months to toughen up. She walked over to the window, the same one that once overlooked emptiness. Now it looked onto her granddaughter's future and her son's darkness across the street. Joan didn't turn around when she spoke again. When they took everything from me, I thought I'd lost who I was. She paused. But it turns out what they stole wasn't me. It was only the noise. Behind her, Henry began to pack. Emma reached for the signed will, carefully folding it into a secure envelope. Gloria stepped forward with her hand resting lightly on Joan's shoulder. What now? Gloria asked. Joan finally turned. I'm going to take a walk, she said. Through my neighborhood like I used to. Emma's brow lifted. Want me to come? Joan shook her head. No, not this time. She walked to the door and opened it. The air was cool. Portland gray light mist hung in the trees like memory. And Joan, finally unburdened by the weight of survival, stepped into it, free. It started with a thread. Emma posted it late on a Sunday night. Just 12 screenshots and 2 short videos laid out with the same quiet precision Joan had used signing her will. They tried to erase my grandmother. They forgot she raised a granddaughter, who knew how to document everything. Within 12 hours, it had over 40,000 shares. By Monday morning, Card Justice for Joan was trending. The screenshots showed the Craigslist listings, Dana joking in emails about liquidating without the funeral, Brian texting someone about cashing in before she croaks. There were pawn slips, forged documents, the forged loan application timeline. Then came the videos. Dana's meltdown at the grocery store. Brian pushing Emma. Joan in court, steady and unblinking, telling the judge, "They thought I was too far gone to notice that I'd be grateful for a couch to sleep on." By noon, a local news van was parked outside Joan's home. Gloria nearly threw a dish at the window. "Of course now they care," she muttered, peeking through the curtain. "Where were they when you came home to four walls and a floor?" Joan was unbothered. She moved slowly through the living room, adjusting a picture frame, watering a plant. She didn't answer any reporters. She didn't need to. The story was already telling itself. That evening, a segment aired on Channel 8, Elder Fraud and Family. Betrayal. Portland woman returns from rehab to find life stolen and fights back. They showed footage from the courtroom, interviews with Henry, a blurred-out clip of Brian ducking into his car. Dana wasn't blurred. She was caught leaving a yoga class in oversized sunglasses and smeared lipstick, trying to wave off the camera while someone in the background yelled, "How's karma treating you, Dana?" That video was clipped, memed, reposted with laughing emojis, and before and after filters. TikToks popped up overnight, side-by-side voiceovers comparing Joan's calm voice to Dana's shrieking panic. Even Dana's friends turned. One by one, the social media unfollows. The group chats went cold. Her name became a punchline in the same Pilates circle she once bragged in. At the next court hearing, Dana showed up alone, hair pulled back tight. No makeup, a discount purse. The courtroom was quiet as Judge Franklin looked through the latest file, his brow furrowed. The court has reviewed multiple public defamation statements made by Mrs. Dana Miller against Ms. Joan Miller, including false accusations of theft, incompetence, and character smears in both text and social media posts. He snapped the folder. Shut. For these, the court imposes a fine of $12,000 to be paid directly to Ms. Miller's legal trust within 60 days. Dana didn't argue. She just nodded, lips pressed into a colorless line. Joan sat across from her, unmoving. She didn't gloat, didn't react. Her stillness was louder than anything Dana could scream. When it was over, Dana stood slowly as if hoping no one noticed. But the cameras were waiting outside. Joan waited a moment, then rose too. Gloria whispered, "You want to go out the side door?" Joan shook her head. "Let them see I don't flinch." They stepped into the light. Reporters angled their mics. Flashbulbs popped. A dozen voices called her name. Joan didn't stop. She just walked past them, steady and unhurried, like it was her sidewalk, her sky, her story now. Emma caught up beside her. "You okay?" Joan nodded. "Public opinion is loud." Emma glanced back. "You think they've learned anything?" Joan didn't look back. "I didn't do this so they'd learn. I did it so I'd never have to explain again." They walked the rest of the block in silence. At the corner, a young woman approached, early 20s in scrubs, holding a to-go coffee and phone in hand. She paused. "Are you Joan Miller?" Joan raised a brow. The woman nodded, nervous. "My mom showed me your video, said you reminded her of her own mother, just wanted to say thank you." Joan's gaze softened. "You're welcome." As they walked away, Gloria muttered, "You're going to need an alias if this keeps up." Joan smiled faintly. "Or a foundation." The final hearing was quieter than the others. No cameras, no reporters, just the gavel, the court seal, and the sound of Brian Miller's future being dismantled, one clause at a time. Joan sat at the front with Henry on one side, Emma on the other. Gloria remained behind them in the gallery, arms folded tight, jaw clenched, like she might still be waiting for a punch that wouldn't come. Judge Franklin didn't bother with preamble. "Mr. Brian Miller, this court finds you guilty of forgery, financial fraud, and elder exploitation. Due to your cooperation post-arraignment, first-time offense, and recommendation from the state attorney, You are hereby sentenced to 5 years probation with full financial restitution to be paid to Ms. Joan Miller and barred from holding fiduciary authority over any estate, trust, or financial institution for the duration of that term." Brian said nothing. He didn't even lift his head. His once favorite gray suit sagged off his frame like it no longer belonged to him. His shoes were scuffed, hair thinning and unbrushed. His hands shook when he tried to fold them neatly on the table, but gave up halfway through. Dana wasn't beside him. She hadn't shown up. Her absence spoke louder than any of her outbursts ever had. A clerk read out the restitution figures. Every stolen dollar, every account, every penalty. When they finished, Judge Franklin looked directly at Joan. "Ms. Miller, this court commends your fortitude. I've seen cases like this crush people. You didn't just endure, you confronted." Joan didn't smile, just offered a simple nod. Calm, dignified, above it all, because she was outside. They emerged into the gray quiet of Portland in late afternoon. No press vans this time, just fresh pavement and the rustle of breeze through the street trees. Gloria took a deep breath and exhaled like she hadn't dared to in weeks. "Justice," she said. "I'll be damned. We actually got justice." Joan didn't answer immediately. She looked down at the leather folder in her hand. Inside it, 2 documents. One was the court's ruling, the other a donation agreement from her attorney's office. Emma noticed. "You're really doing it." Joan handed the folder to her. "I'm not giving it to them. I'm giving it to the one still stuck like I was." Emma opened the file and read silently. Her eyes flicked over the language, establishing the Joan E. Miller Scholarship Fund for Senior Rehabilitation and Reintegration. Initial donation $125,000 from the Miller Resilience Trust. Focus funding long-term care, counseling, legal assistance, and life transition programs for elderly women recovering from illness or injury. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she looked up. "Grandma." Joan took her hand. "It's not just about surviving anymore." Henry stepped forward from the courthouse steps, signature pen in hand. "All that's left is a signature." Joan accepted the pen. The same hand that had once been too weak to lift her fork in rehab now flowed in clean cursive across the page. "Done." Gloria blinked fast. "Well, you just changed someone's life and you didn't even break stride." Emma hugged her suddenly, arms tight around her shoulders. "You didn't just survive rehab," she whispered. "You conquered after." Joan leaned into the embrace for a beat. "I wasn't done living. I just had to remember I'd started." They walked together toward the car. Leaves danced on the wind like confetti. As they reached the sidewalk, Emma hesitated. "What about Brian?" Joan paused, looked back. Not with anger, not with forgiveness either, just clarity. "I gave him a roof, a name, a mother." She turned forward again. "He'll never have another one of any of those." The ceremony was modest. A few rows of folding chairs lined up in the multi-purpose room of the rehabilitation center where Joan had once learned to walk again. The carpet was the same shade of institutional gray. The coffee was weak. The podium was slightly wobbly, but none of that mattered because the room was full. Former patients, nurses in scrubs, counselors, social workers, even a few local officials, all gathered under a plastic banner printed in bold navy letters, the Joan E. Miller Scholarship Fund for Senior Rehabilitation and Reintegration Launch. Ceremony. A framed photo of Joan sat at the registration table, her portrait taken last month, dignified, proud. She wore the same charcoal sweater she had on now. Emma stood at the podium, her voice clear, steady. "My grandmother came back from something that breaks most people," she said. "She didn't just rebuild her life. She made sure others could rebuild theirs, too." Joan sat front row, hands folded quietly in her lap. Gloria sat beside her, sunglasses perched on her head despite the cloudy sky outside. She dabbed at the corner of her eye with a folded napkin. This fund, Emma continued, will offer grants to women over 60 who are transitioning out of long-term care for housing, legal aid, transportation, advocacy, because recovery doesn't end when you walk out the door. Sometimes that's when it really begins. Polite applause rippled through the room. Then Emma smiled, soft, proud, and said, "I'm honored to be named the fund's first trustee." She stepped down from the podium. Joan stood as she approached. They embraced, brief but tight. "I trust you," Joan whispered. "And that's more than I can say about anyone for a long, long time." Emma pulled back. "You gave me something that can't be stolen." Gloria let out a quiet sniff. "Damn it. I said I wouldn't cry until someone played piano." Joan chuckled gently. When the last speech ended and the coffee ran low, the press moved in. A small local news crew, a freelance journalist from a senior care magazine, a pair of podcasters, who asked for a 5-minute interview. Joan declined politely. She had no interest in being a symbol, just a solution. Outside, the rain held off. A rare sunbreak cut through the clouds, casting a soft glow across the front of the building. Joan stood near the sidewalk, watching as a silver minivan pulled up to the curb. An older woman stepped out slowly using a cane. Her daughter helped her onto the sidewalk, where they stood looking at the banner still fluttering slightly in the tea breeze. "That's her," the younger woman said. "That's the one I told you about." Joan smiled. The older woman waved once tentatively. Joan waved back. Gloria stepped up beside her, eyes on the departing crowd. "You feel it?" she asked. "What?" That click, that rightness, like the world shifted half an inch and locked into place. Joan didn't answer immediately, then softly. "Yes." She looked down the sidewalk toward nothing in particular. "It's not just about what they stole, it's about what they couldn't." Gloria exhaled. "You gave back what they took from yourself. From everybody." Joan placed a hand on her arm. "Then maybe now it's really over." Emma joined them with a clipboard, notebook tucked under one arm. "They want you to come inside for one last photo." Joan shook her head. "Let them take yours." Emma blinked. "Are you sure?" "You're the future," Joan said, smiling. "They should see what I built, not what I survived." They stood in the sunlight for a moment longer. As the camera flashed from inside, a new sign was being mounted on the Rehab Center's lobby wall. A brass plaque etched with Joan's name under the words, "She returned, she restored, she raised others." The room wasn't grand. It didn't need to be. The wallpaper had been peeled and replaced, soft eggshell blue with a subtle floral imprint. A new set of sheer curtains fluttered gently against the cool window pane. The bedspread was hand-stitched, a faded patchwork of soft creams and wine reds made by Joan's mother half a century ago. On the nightstand sat a lavender candle half-burned, its wick curling slightly in a puddle of wax. Next to it, a photo of Emma as a child, cradled in Joan's lap, both of them mid-laugh. The room smelled faintly of lemon oil and chamomile. Joan sat in the armchair by the window, wrapped in her cardigan. Her cane rested beside her, unused tonight. She stared out at the early snow, flakes tumbling down in slow, unhurried spirals. Behind her, the kitchen table was set for 3. A small roast, potatoes with rosemary, thick slices of bread warmed in foil. Emma poured cider into ceramic mugs while Gloria folded napkins with far more care than necessary. "Plates are warm," Gloria said, "so act impressed." Joan didn't turn, but smiled. "Consider me floored." Emma carried the mugs over, setting one at Joan's elbow. "Smells like Christmas already." "Just a rehearsal," Gloria said, settling in across the table. "We'll burn the rolls when it really counts." Joan finally rose slowly, but without struggle. She crossed the room and took her seat, looking at both of them with a softness that hadn't always been there. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" Emma asked. Joan's gaze flicked to her granddaughter for not letting me forget who I was. They ate slowly, comfortably. No toasts, no speeches, just warmth and the clink of forks and the gentle rustle of wind pushing against the windows. After dinner, Emma began clearing the dishes. Gloria poured one last cup of cider for Joan and lit the candle again. Joan watched the flame dance, its light reflected in the polished wood of the table, the softness of her hands. Then, almost to herself, she spoke. They tried to erase me. Gloria stilled. Emma turned from the sink. Joan didn't look at them. She was somewhere else. Quietly, peacefully so. They thought if they stripped the furniture, sold the jewelry, forged my name enough times that they could rewrite me into absence. She glanced down, but I was never the furniture. She looked up now, full and clear. I rewrote the story. Silence followed, not out of awkwardness, but reverence. Gloria reached over and gently laid her hand over Joan's. Outside, snow continued to fall, thicker now, covering the sidewalks, dusting the hedges like powdered sugar. The windows began to fog slightly at the edges. Joan stood and moved to the living room. A small brass plaque had been mounted beside her fireplace just that morning. It was an exact replica of the one in the rehab center lobby. She returned. She restored. She raised others. Candlelight shimmered across the etched letters. Joan looked at it for a long time. Then she stepped to the window. The house across the street, Brian and Dana's former home, sat dark and cold. A foreclosure sign now hung in the snow-covered yard. She felt nothing when she looked at it. Not anger, not pride, just distance. Emma appeared behind her with a folded blanket and draped it gently over Joan's shoulders. Gloria handed her a hot water bottle wrapped in flannel. Joan didn't speak right away. She stepped once more to the window, watched the snow collect at the corners. She blinked slowly, one hand curled around the steaming cider, the other still, on the windowsill, and then just loud enough for both of them to hear. After 22 months in rehab, I came back to nothing. I built everything again without them.